Space Marines are the poster children of Warhammer, let's not pretend otherwise. You can argue about if they deserve it or not, but they are the guys that most people only passingly familiar with the various settings would look at and go, yep, that's a Warhammer guy right there. But they, of course, weren't the first. Even if you want to talk just about larger-than-life figures in a literal and figurative sense, they were not the first Warhammer creations to be that. They were not the first to wear blessed, or cursed, armor with infinite more intimidation factor than practicality, the first to ride to war in the name of their god on a crusade. That honor doesn't even go to someone in Warhammer 40k, because if you're willing to stretch some definitions, even original Warhammer Fantasy had power armor. The power here is just magical in nature instead of technological. Before there were cries of For the Emperor, before we had the end times and Age of Sigmar, hell, before we had an Empire of Man, there have always been in some way or other the Warriors of Chaos. I'm not kidding. Here's the first ever edition of Warhammer. That's Harry the Hammer, later revealed to be a Chaos Warrior. These servants of evil go all the way back to the beginning, and even as time went on, they were still some of the coolest folks around, if proper jerks, of course. So tell me, do you want to pillage and burn in the name of the Dark Gods? Do you not care for the morality and petty goals of the weaklings to the south? Do you miss when only the main bad guys had the awesome giant super armor and want to return to those days? Well then, why don't you have a look at the Warriors of Chaos? But before I begin, are you perhaps watching this video as you get ready for bed? Well, if you are, have I the thing for you. Manta Sleep, the sponsor of this video. Manta Sleep makes the finest sleeping mask this world has ever seen. For making sure you shut out the world and get the best night's sleep possible, no one does it like them. You want to listen to some music as you sleep? Bam! The Manta Sleep Sound Mask for all your music and podcast needs. Maybe you prefer a bit of weight on you when you sleep. Well, the weighted sleep mask is a wonderful bit of pressure that helps those who want a bit of that sort of thing sleep like a baby. And for an all-around quality mask, you can't go wrong with the Manta Sleep Pro. It's just an all-around great mask, plain and simple. I've been using the Manta Sleep Silk Mask lately. It's just so soft and still perfectly blocks out all the light you might worry about. I just slap it on and bam, I'm ready for a great night's sleep. 10 out of 10, would recommend. And to get yourself one of these fine Manta Sleep masks, I've just the thing for you. Use my link in the description and pinned comment and use code PANCREAS to get yourself up to 20% off for the summer night sale. If you spend $105, you get yourself 15% off, and if you spend $165, you get yourself a nice 20% discount. That's the link in the description and pinned comment and code PANCREAS for the above deals. You spend a third of your life asleep, so why not use Manta Sleep to give yourself the best night's sleep possible? Now then, turn on a Glory Hammer album and get ready to conquer the old world. The Warriors of Chaos, unlike most other Warhammer Fantasy/Old World factions, don't have origins of being created by the Old Ones. Technically, it was at least partially still their fault. The Old Ones made humanity and fantasy for starters, which is admittedly not their fault humanity turned to chaos, but the origins are still there. And the Old Ones also made the polar warp gates that chaos would breach into reality from, so there's another strike towards them being involved, but directly making them? Nah, not their fault. That said, the Old One's way of making humanity imperfect does inherently relate to why the Warriors of Chaos came to be. The Elves, the first batch, were a bit too frail and tended to focus on themselves too much. The Dwarfs, the second race created, were not in tune with magic at all, to the point of draining it with their mere presence. Something that to be sure did help counter demons, which are beings made of magic, and Tzeentch ones especially, but this was more of a hindrance than help. Being able to level a county with a spell tends to be more helpful than being able to moderately lessen how charred a fireball makes your corpse after all, and dwarf stubbornness tended to leave them open to being tricked. So third, the Old Ones made humanity. Able to use magic, if not quite as well as the elves, able to handle the material world just fine, if not as good as the dwarfs. On paper, the happy middle ground had finally been reached. But two key flaws were to be found in nascent mankind. One is that they did not have nearly the resistance to corruption that elf and dwarf did. Dwarf's inherent resistance to magic meant that they didn't have to do anything to be damn near immune to chaos, while the elves' natural knowledge of and ability to control magic meant that they knew how to avoid it with ease. Both of these races, of course, have Chaos Worshippers, but those were more often than not explicit choices on their part for the Dark Elves and Chaos Dwarfs, respectively. But mankind could fall victim to the predations of Chaos without having asked for it, becoming corrupted through little fault of their own. And the second flaw was ambition. Likely because the Old Ones wanted to pivot from the Dwarves' conservatism, meaning they'd be perfectly happy if nothing ever changed ever, mankind was made to always want to reach for the stars. The Old Ones figured this would let them counteract demon schemes, a more dynamic race wishing to fight to their best and rise to the occasion at all times. This is true, but the flip side of that coin meant that when the right person was whispered to by the Dark God speaking of how they could achieve endless power if they just sold their soul, the Old Ones' weapon would turn against them. These two flaws in tandem would end up creating the groups of men that would come to make up the bulk of the monsters known as the Warriors of Chaos. When Chaos invaded the world for the first time, the bulk of the fighting was done by demons, who without the vortex to siphon magic from the world could manifest with almost no effort. But early on, mankind must have been active under Chaos's thrall at least somewhat, for how else can you explain Be'lakor, the first demon prince? But Chaos was pushed back by the combined efforts of the lizardmen, elves, and a few others here and there, and became much more isolated to the north. And the adaptability of mankind meant that they could live anywhere, including the frozen northern polar regions of the Warhammer world, where resources are scarce and the whispers of the gods of Chaos anything but. Chaos also exists in the South Pole, side note, I didn't forget that, but no followers of it are down there because there's no people there. Why would a Northman go to the southern gate to reach the gods? That's just too much traveling for the same result. Not all Chaos followers come from the north, of course, so not all people up north are full-blown Chaos worshippers. Not to the extent you might think, anyways. Many of the southernmost tribes of Norska actually interact with the Empire quite peacefully, engaging in trade and more. But the Chaos gods are always present, and the farther north you go, the more obvious this becomes. The fact many of the ancestors of the now Norskins, known back then as the Norsai, were driven out of their homes by Sigmar himself only fueled their grudges against the Southerners. Not that Sigmar just decided they were whack, they had raided plenty often and killed his father, but valid or not, the grudge remains against the South. The main groups that become warriors of chaos are the Norskin, Kurgan, and Hung societies of tribes. The Norskins are the most well-known, especially nowadays after being a faction proper in Warhammer Total War rather than the occasional model in the Warriors of Chaos army. They're Vikings. There's a decent bit more about them, like how they oftentimes call the Chaos gods by names such as the Hound or the Crow, but they're Vikings. The image that comes to mind when I say the word Vikings is at least 90% accurate, I promise you. The Kurgan are the next group, and to once again simplify, they can easily be called Chaos Mongols. They're nomadic people who live in the steppes, ride horses, and used to be united under a great Kurgan before the Empire fell apart. They're particularly nasty groups of Chaos worshippers to the point of deforming children as they grow up to try and push along more chaotic mutations. And then we have the Hung, who are like the Kurgans but worse. There's nothing redeeming about them, and quite frankly nothing interesting about them beyond the fact the Great Walls of both Cathay and Nagaron were built to keep them out because they suck that hard. You can ignore them safely, because the Kurgan are the cool Chaos Mongols and gave us people like Asavar Kul and Everchosen, while the Hung are bordering on the old pygmy miniatures when it comes to how they're portraying people. Together, these people, as well as a few others, but they're even less noteworthy overall, form the basis of what becomes a warrior of chaos. But they're not the true warriors, not as we'd see them. They are savage beings stronger than almost any southern human who lives in their soft, weak little societies, but a warrior of chaos is something beyond human. And in the northern chaos wastes, they're born anew. All of these people constantly fight amongst themselves and each other, more than they fight southerners even. To die in battle in the service of the most primordial of gods is a blessing after all, even if to the outside observer it looks like you died because Tzeentch was bored and this was his version of watching The Simpsons on repeat. Every now and again, however, we find ourselves a marauder built differently. Communing with dark powers or taking the esoteric path of walking far enough north, they emerge brimming with power and wearing cursed armor from the forges of the gods themselves. Even more rarely arises a true leader capable of wrangling some of the tribes of chaos together into a properly organized invasion into the south of the Warhammer world. Under these figures, what happens are not simple raids, but the massed forces of chaos besieging entire sections of the Empire or Kislev. And on the rarest of occasions arises a Chaos Lord to bring shame to them all, an Everchosen, handpicked by each of the Chaos Gods to lead their hordes, demonic and mortal powers alike quail under them. Though we know from the end times who was the one to finally do the world in, those that preceded Archaon were no less mighty for their part. After all, they had to contend with a setting the parent company wasn't intending on executing at that point of the timeline, not the silly Billy Brigade that was everyone not part of Chaos during that event. At the time of the Old World, no Everchosen has truly wrangled the various tribes under one banner yet, but there are whispers coming from the north of a Chaos Lord who may damn well be the next one. The forces of Chaos are marshalling in ways unlike anything but as if led by such a figure, organized in ways they would not be without a leader of such caliber to guide them. Figures such as Frydal the Chainmaker, who would be decade or perhaps century-defining threats in better times, are just the most prominent of the repeated and devastating incursions into the south. For those who've managed to hear the whispers, and also those of us who knew the Warhammer fantasy timeline, but let's not ruin the mystique, they say but one name, Asavar Kul. The next Everchosen is right around the corner, ladies and gentlemen, so even though we know he fails, you can expect the Empire and more to have their work more than cut out for them. Especially because they've never been more divided than as they stand now. And as a Warrior of Chaos player, it is your time to shine. The weakling followers of Sigmar and Ursun are ripe for the taking to be sacrificed to the true gods of the setting. The dwarfs are worse off than ever before, the elves are isolated, Grand Cathay's dragons are nothing before the might of chaos, and everyone else is barely worth considering. Why should you let the shattered echoes of the vampire counts or some worthless greenskins stand in your way? Better yet, why stop there? Chaos is always infighting, is it not? And your army is your own to build. Get the narrative games going with your local group, and when Asavar Kul finally rolls around, don't greet him as you would your overlord. Greet him as a pretender to the throne of the Ever-Chosen that's so rightfully yours to claim. The possibilities are as endless as the whims of chaos, so why not get into why you should play this army? To start us off, the Warriors of Chaos are the most brutal of bastards in a setting full of nothing but brutal bastards. As per their most basic of lore, they live in a world where survival is never guaranteed, and the worships of the gods is not what it is in the South, of theological debates and arguments over whose preachers are best. Worship here is the simple fact that they are real, and the simple fact that if you piss them off, you're gonna suffer greatly for it. They have thrived in the frozen wastelands of the North by being the most monstrous and effective raiders in all of history, marching southward to take what they need and return victorious. They prove they're strong enough to do this and thus lead these expeditions by first being strong enough to call themselves true warriors of chaos, marching into hell and coming back out with the most awesome armor Warhammer's yet put out. I mean, look at these guys. Metal as all hell, they are. The strongest in Warhammer fantasy, and indeed the old world, lies to the north. In terms of pure might, you'll find none who can truly match them, if only because Grimgor Ironhide may or may not be around quite yet. On the topic of the gods being simple facts of life for them, they're also a Warhammer faction purely inundated in fantasy. Even the simplest of Marauders is likely mutated to some degree or other, be it some strange colored eyes or a tentacle instead of some limbs or a digit. Warriors of Chaos up the ante by wearing the aforementioned cursed armor they can never take off in the direct service of the dark gods, be it one in particular or all at once, or whichever god they're trying to con at the moment, for all that rarely works out well for the guy trying to do it. Magic runs through the very landscape. Evil magic, sure, but still magic. Horrific monstrosity that may or may not have been human once upon a time lurk around almost every corner, and in these lands the men of the North haven't just survived, they've conquered it. When even the humblest of Norscan marauders raids Nordland, he does so with the purpose of, yes, getting mundane needs like food met, but also making at least a sacrifice or two of a prisoner to the dark gods. When the Chaos Warriors proper march forth, it's because the gods have spoken and the only word they know is kill. If you want an army inundated in fantasy in a fantasy setting, this is the best choice around. There's no action they undertake mundane in nature. They can be quite varied as well, something I'm delighted to say returns in the rules sections with one major exception. There's 4 major chaos gods to worship and plenty more minor ones if you dig through some old source books, so you already got that covered if you don't want to do any proper lore making of your own for your personal army. And motivations can vary from warband to warband too. Some tribes of marauders view any Southling attack on them as an affront, others as fair game for all the raiding they do to them. Some are hordes motivated by genuine devotions to the gods, others collections of traitorous bastards all trying to play each other and come out on top that only pray to the gods because they'll get their souls eaten if they don't. Some can have genuinely sympathetic feelings and desires, such as Lord Mortkin, who is the coolest guy ever, and by God do I wish he didn't exist for only a single lore blurb in 8th edition fantasy. If you can think of a reason someone would be crusading around with the Vikings and Super Soldier Vikings, it's lore friendly. You think every Chaos Lord started off evil? Remember what the road to hell is paved with, folks. Although in Warhammer, the pavement on that is mostly skulls, I'll admit. And speaking of admitting things to ourselves, morality. A sympathetic villain, one with understandable backstory beats that can make you understand them or even root for them, is great. Transformers 1 is a banger movie and makes you continue on some level feeling for a guy who just ripped someone in half. But at least personally, I don't want that here. I want a cackling madman raining down magical hellfire on his foes because he can. I want a warrior who's barely more than a rabid dog ripping people in half because Khorne loves that shit. I want an army of evil incarnate, people who raid and pillage into the civilized world because they're evil, they know they're evil, and they love every second of it. And that's what the Warriors of Chaos gave us. These rampaging psychos sacrifice people to evil deities and demons, murder each other to prove to those same beings that they're the coolest and deserve all the rewards, and that's all before the previously mentioned Southling slaughter. Almost every one of the Warriors of Chaos are utter pricks, and some are the evilest beings around. Maybe not quite the evilest, but that's hardly fair to judge them for that when they exist in the same setting as the Skaven. And the Warriors of Chaos just do it in a way that the Skaven don't, for all that it is admittedly a bit less entertaining. They do it for power and glory, and throw themselves into the worst of conditions and battles to get those two things. There is no room for true cowardice, and that's fine, for any who showed such traits were weak and deserved to be punished and killed anyways. If you want an army of nothing but Sith Lords in Warhammer, then congratulations. You found it. You are the end-all be-all of Warhammer bad guys, and you should be reveling in it. They can be sneaky evil too, that's nice to see. Chaos cults worlds litter the civilized nations, from the Empire to Kislev and even Cathay. Bretonnia too, but I'd hardly call them civilized. From within these nations oftentimes lies the beginning of a chaos invasion, as anyone from the lowest of peasants to the highest of nobles can secretly be setting the stage for the proper warriors to descend, perhaps even joining them. Your warband could easily be flavored like that, especially if you prefer Tzeentch. The cults do some groundwork, cast a portal spell, and then from within an Imperial city emerges a full-on attack force of Chaos warriors. Sneaky evil can be fun too, and Chaos provides it. The rewards for all this horrid behavior are also unmatched. The morality of those rewards is firmly in the moral low ground, but come on now. Don't try and monologue to someone playing this army about how sacrificing a few 100,000 people to Nurgle is bad. Yeah, dickhead, I know it's evil. I'm gonna do it anyways. What almost every Chaos Warrior desires, either from the very start of their journey or as they progress, is to become nothing short of a Demon Prince. Demon Princes, for all that they get jobbed in books pretty regularly alongside Crater Demons, are basically minor chaos gods unto themselves. They're immortal and almost unkillable, for without some serious heavy-duty divine help, killing one of them just banishes them back to the warp for a bit. They can reside in the same realm as the gods themselves, and perhaps even carve out a chunk of it for their own schemes, and entire warbands will flock to them. Even at just the Chaos Lord step, there are already some of the most physically powerful beings around, commanding legions of underlings. When morality is thrown to the wayside, and with this army why wouldn't it be, something close to ultimate power is up for grabs if you can just take it. As for who can get these rewards, anyone. The warriors aren't here to judge you for where you came from, not after you prove yourself at least. Anyone from any realm of Warhammer fantasy can march up north and prove themselves, and if they do so, they'll be welcomed into the Warriors of Chaos. Perhaps not quite with open arms, but acceptance of another competitor in the great game. Gotrek and Felix's first major opponent, or at least what I'd call their first major opponent, was just some lady who decided that, hey, I'm gonna listen to the Cornate Demon telling me to kill my family. Chaos doesn't care who you are, because as long as you slaughter in its name, you too could become a Demon Prince if you try hard enough. And while proper Warriors of Chaos and the Baroque armor tend to work best in large-scale conflicts, the army can do all levels of engagement equally well. Sure, a band of a bunch of Chosen invading a village in nowhere Ostlin aren't going to be gaining much glory, but with the various Marauders in the army, you can perfectly justify that battle in lore. It's a small raid to get started on the road to true power. Medium-scale engagements just bring more Marauders, and maybe then you can implement some true warriors at that point as they realize all those Marauders will attract some good fights. And at the largest scales, when Chaos Lords or even Ever-Chosens are involved, you got nothing but the blackest of voids stretching across the horizon as the finest warriors of the gods make sure their armor is oiled with the choicest of bloods for the grandest of battles. If there's a fight, then someone from the north will come swinging by for it, be they humble Vikings or real murder Vikings. And last lore positive, you've got the army that helped define what Warhammer is. There's something to be said, I feel, for being what I truly believe to be the fellows that gave birth to even the Space Marines. Large, intimidating armor that's in no way practical, being worn by followers of gods that don't truly care for those beneath them. Now that's the essence of Chaos and Warhammer right there, so if you want to be arguably the original army of John Warhammers, here it is in all its dark glory. Overall army special rules first, then we'll get more specific, though funny enough, the overall rules are going to take a lot longer. First off, ensorcelled weapons. Units with this keyword automatically get the magical weapons rule and -1 to AP on their hand weapons, so before anything else, anyone relying solely on heavy armor like dwarfs is in for a bad day. This stops applying to special weapons, so your greatswords don't get to automatically turn anyone's armor into paste, but it still means that even the most basic weapon a warrior of Chaos has with this rule is going to pound standard troops into mulch. Chaos armor, meanwhile, gives you a ward save of whatever number is specified next to the keyword. This is the gear people trade their humanity for, after all. It damn well better be worth it. As a bonus, your wizards can wear it freely. Everyone else complaining about their wizards being squishy? That's a them problem. They should have spent more time in the gym. Eye of the Gods, meanwhile, is the rule for turning your already strong characters into utter monsters. During the command phase, a character with that special rule can roll a d6. If you roll a 1, you either get Stupidity as a special rule or a -1 to your leadership if the model already has it. Not great. Not great, but everything else is purely beneficial. A 2 gives you +1 to initiative until the start of your next turn, with the 3 doing the same but for toughness. The next 3 rolls are even more BS because they're permanent. 4 gives you +1 to their weapon skill, a 5 +1 to their attacks, and a 6 +1 to strength and leadership. Yeah, it's gonna suck if you get Stupidity, but you have a 5 out of 6 chance for something positive, and a 1 out of 2 chance for permanent benefits. Roll that shit every chance you get, go wild. Chaos doesn't want cowards and wants those who take chances for glory. It is admittedly a shame that the system was toned down, because in old fantasy you could become either a Chaos Spawn or a Demon Prince, but this is still fun and flavorful, and in terms of gameplay it's near pure benefit. Plenty of units and characters can also take a mark Mark of the Gods. Those are easy stuff. With Khorne, you get the Frenzy rule. With Nurgles, any unit attacking something with Nurgle's Mark has to reroll natural hit rolls of 6. Turn a guaranteed hit into a miss through the power of how badly you reek. Slaanesh gives units +1 to initiative during the first round of any combat, and if the majority of models in a unit all have her mark, all panic tests are automatically passed. Tzeentch gives its bearers a bit of magic resistance to ignore spells, and the Flaming Attacks rule to make Tomb King players cry, and if a wizard with it joins a unit with a unit strength of 10 or more, they get +1 to casting spells. It does go away if enough people in it die or the wizard leaves, however. And in a startling change of pace that's still welcome, there's even a Chaos Undivided mark. Real simple, anything with it can reroll all failed fear, panic, or terror tests. They've seen the depths of chaos, you gotta try damn hard to frighten them. The Undivided mark also comes standard on more or less the entire model range, so as a bonus, this army is hard to damage the morale of, even if the stats might suggest otherwise for a few chaff units. Their magic lore is also solid, with room to cheese how getting spells works for whatever you want. After you randomly roll for your spells, you can discard one for either a given lore signature spell or a corresponding spell based on which mark they pick. So if you gave them Tzeentch's mark, they can choose Tzeentch's spell in the Lore of Chaos. Those with the Mark of Khorne do miss out on this, but if you have a wizard, not only can they not take Khorne's mark, but why would you want to do that with them anyways? As for the spells themselves, the Undivided one reduces enemy movement, Slaanesh's gives an enemy unit strikes last, Nurgle's is an enchantment that increases its target's toughness by 1 while in play, and Tzeentch's is just a magic missile. The Raising of Westerland Arcane Journal also helps Marauders by letting them snag their own marks, basically. They're once a game effects that don't replace the Mark of Chaos Undivided, which comes on all units by default, so that's damn helpful. +1 to weapon skill for Khorne's bonus, +1 to toughness for Nurgle's, poisoned attacks for Slaanesh's, and a 6-up ward save for Tzeentch's. There's a ton of extra stuff Westerland also added, but to save time, I won't cover it here. Alright, almost done with the busy work. Their magic items are good, like the arcane item that gives wizards near the holder +1 to casting rolls, or the sword that lets them add a d3 to their strength value, -2 AP, strike first, d3 extra attacks, and magical attacks. Yes, obliterate this unit of Dwarf Ironbreakers in one turn, why not? Now, of course, if you roll a 1 to hit with that weapon, you have to resolve that attack against either the unit your wielder is in or the unit itself if they're alone, but be reasonable. For all that monstrous value this weapon gives you, just take it. What's a bit of friendly fire between damned comrades? Even their low-cost magic items are goated. 5 points to reroll on the Eye of the Gods table once? Yeah, that's absolutely worth it. That can either save you from stupidity or give you a chance for a permanent +1 to something you really want. There's also Gifts of Chaos. Only 1 each can be taken per army, but they're also good. The most expensive means any hit rolls of 2 automatically fail to wound against the bearer, meaning all attack rolls have a 1 in 3 chance to just not hurt them if they even hit to begin with. Another gives them an extra arm, which therefore translates to them having 1 extra attack, making this not only a great way to spam someone with a flurry of blows, but it is to my knowledge the closest thing Warhammer Fantasy has to General Grievous, and therefore his peak. Okay, actual army time now. First off, you have infinite room to customize. You know how many mount options a Chaos Lord has? They have 6. Plain old horsey, a demonic horsey, 2 kinds of chariots, a manticore, or a chaos dragon. Give them Gifts of Chaos, all sorts of weapons, Marks of Chaos. This extends to lesser versions of the Lord characters, sorcerers, even your most basic of units have room for all sorts of upgrades. If you want to get creative with list building, the only competition you have in that department are the High Elves, and even then, I still think there's more room here than there, which is impressive because they have a lot too. Assuming you didn't click on the video and then immediately fall asleep till now, I'm sure you heard me just say that I'm passing by a whole list of things added because of how long I'll be going on about specific extra rules and buffs you can take and get. One game your lord is kitted for killing characters, the next he specializes in mulching through chaff. The corrupted sky of the Chaos Wastes is the limit for customization even between a single model. Once you pick out your army, what do you expect to go well for you though? Well, almost everything. I'll level with you. The Warriors of Chaos have the best in almost every category of gameplay. Like I said earlier, it'll actually make the rest of this segment fly by pretty quickly because of how simple it is to explain. Level 4 wizards are easy for them to get, for example, and for more traditional leaders, Chaos Lords have a weapon skill of 9, strength and toughness of 5, 4 wounds, 6 initiative, 5 attacks, and leadership 9. Before you even think about giving them fancy magical weapons, they're already flipping the light switch off on anything in front of them. Death is here for you Imperial weaklings, and that's before you put the dude on a dragon. Even normal Chaos Warriors have weapon skill 5 and strength and toughness 4. The moment you get into melee with anyone but the dwarfs, they're gonna melt. Near everyone in the army also has heavy armor, and Chosen as well as the Lords can take full plate armor for damn near zero cost, so your opponents aren't going to be able to wound you easily either. All of your other roles in the army also perform spectacularly, beyond basic infantry. Chaos Trolls and Ogres can smash through lines quite well. Chaos Knights and the Chosen variant are some of the best heavy cavalry around. Marauder Horsemen are decent enough at charging down foes such as archers. Almost any role you can think of can be filled to great effect, because units in the Warriors of Chaos are just good. These are beings who've devoted their lives to the devils of the world, and in return they receive their blessings. They damn well better be outperforming everyone else. Hell, just Chosen, the elite infantry, are equal to some unnamed generic character models other armies have. They're that good. Chariots, Manticores, Chaos Dragons, genuinely, there's something for everyone, be you a fan of Monster Mash, weaker units like Marauders, or the classic blocks of Chaos Warriors. Dragon Ogres especially, who are just unfair to fight. And with Marks and more added in, your basic Chaos Warrior can give enemy elite infantry a hell of a fight, and even if not, they'll at least need some time to properly chew through your forces. Special shout out to Chaos Warhounds, which by virtue of being fast, cheap, even with some small buffs, and Vanguard, mean they're some of the best at not only being chaff, but harassing key enemy units. There's ways to inflict fear and terror on your enemies, there's ways to quickly move up the board, you have a good magical game, you beat damn near anyone in a challenge situation if they're stupid enough to say yes to you. You have enough units and abilities across a variety of fields to avoid being a one-trick pony for the most part, and with all the upgrades available to you after your first few purchases of this army, you could play surprisingly varied games without swapping out a single unit. You can also fairly easily ally with armies such as the Beastmen, particularly with one of the armies of infamy the Warriors have. If you somehow needed more variety, it ain't hard to get. As for some non-rules tabletop positives, one is that the quality of the models has mostly held up. The old Chaos Warriors were some of the most simple yet elegantly designed units I've seen GW put out, to hell with what any pure AOS players say. Immediately threatening silhouette with a timeless big evil dark armor, its peak. Others like the Hell Cannon have just held up well, and the Skin Wolves really speak to me. No, I don't have a Fur Affinity account, I just think they're neat. If you really want new stuff though, the newly released Marauders are phenomenally well done. Perhaps some slight scaling issues when you put them next to the old Chaos Warriors, but I still think they fit in fine. And if it really bothers you, just buy the Slaves to Darkness Chaos Warriors from Age of Sigmar and fit them onto the old world bases. It's a bit tricky, especially with the Age of Sigmar Chaos Knights, but that's the price you pay for being a model snob. The Chaos Ogres though are bad, those could use an update yesterday. And they're one of the cheapest armies to collect for their final positive, though I do have a very unfortunate, if likely temporary caveat to that in the cons. Collecting this army because of how many upgrades you can give even basic units means that by old world standards, you can build out a proper force for far less actual money than anyone else. Slap on a few upgrades here, a few marks of the gods there, and presto. You filled out a 2K list with a dollar amount some other armies would barely be able to squeak by 1500 with, and with far less potential for variety at that. Monetarily and creatively speaking, the Warriors of Chaos are built different from anyone else. It's actually kind of insane. Before the time-honored tradition of bitching about GW's business practices, however, we must come to the more personally time-honored tradition on this channel of trying to frame things that bother me as objective complaints to be had. As always, the most obvious ones first. You are the bad guys. That's it. Even the occasional sympathetic cast character that sometimes pops up is surrounded by significantly less sympathetic assholes who are just plain evil. If that bothers you, then ignore this army entirely. To be honest, if that bothers you, I'm surprised you made it this far into the video, because looking at any artwork of them, it's like, yeah, they're utterly awful. How is this not obvious? That's the fun. But if it is a problem, look elsewhere. As the designated bad guys, however, it does mean that they almost always lose. Now, obviously, that's not totally true in this case. GW for all the end times were atrocious had the balls to do what few authors or companies ever do with a franchise and say, yeah, the bad guys won this one. A decision entirely motivated by profit, but it's a win for Chaos. The Old World is a prequel setting though. It's telling the story of how the factions involved hit where they were at in the modern day of the setting. They were still around in the modern day of the setting, which means Chaos's grand invasion lost. It's established fantasy lore by this point, so I don't think anyone will complain too hard, but it does also mean that while everyone else's army gets the story of how they heroically fought back the darkness, you get the story of how your army was either stomped or fumbled the battle at the last hurdle, depending on how the lore is handled. Sometimes foregone conclusions are fun, but a foregone conclusion heading towards the least satisfying foregone conclusion ever can be a bit less fun. That and general low-scale plot armor means that all the random nowhere villages you burn down mean basically nothing and will be thwarted later on by the heroes. To put it another way, until the end times you can fairly safely assume your army is probably fulfilling the role of enemy in a Gotrek and Felix novel. And that's the worst job you can have in all of Warhammer. The world may be doomed to you by canon, but for the next few hundred years of in-universe history, so too are all your attempts to do anything meaningful. As much as I was saying the potential for ultimate powers at the hands of your army, most people don't get that. Most warriors of chaos get an unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere, either sacrificed as they war with each other, or tossed in a pile after another defeat at the hands of the Empire. The worst off become chaos spawn, those whose mind, body, and soul have all been melted like candle wax into the ultimate meat monster. When you start building your army and give your Chaos Lord all the cool backstory and everything else you can think of, keep in mind they have even less chance of a happy ending than anyone else in this godforsaken setting does. If you like to gamble at all on green, then by all means, go for it. But the price of losing the bet here is your soul literally melting before reforming, melting again, and on in an infinite cycle of hell. Tread lightly, because at the end of the day, your forces are nothing but playthings for the Chaos Gods. Less literally damning, but still unfortunate, is the classic villain stick of most of your fighting being internal. Have you ever wondered why Warhammer tends to focus on when Chaos is getting its shit together? It's because at all other times, Chaos is less than useless. Cults kill themselves off at a rate that probably gives witch hunters a run for their money through infighting. Most of the Marauder tribes that eventually create warriors of chaos fight each other. Most chaos warriors fight chaos warriors of other gods. The moment you step away from Imperial territory, you're fighting your supposed allies nonstop. Plus, there's something to be said about having something else to fight for. That's why people like the Empire. They're normal people fighting for their country and families. Fighting for nothing but power and glory gets old after a while, narratively at least. Not to come across as a total bitch, and I'm sure you can tell from this criticism that I don't run warriors as my main army, but sometimes I want to fight so I can go home and one day not fight. Maybe I want to enjoy spending time with friends and family that I don't have to worry about stabbing me in the back, or the front, or the side, or some fourth thing that only works because chaos is nonsense. Maybe I just want to live in a nice house with a nice garden, and not on the doorsteps of hell where the ground is iron and the air is anything from normal air to carbon monoxide to silly string in a given moment. A warrior of chaos might start off like this, but by the end of their journey they're just a slave to darkness seeking damned glory, and all they once cared about is a distant memory at most. Not the most fleshed out of characters a lot of the time, unfortunately, for all that they make up for it by being metal as hell. This will be much like the Dwarf Downsides, truth be told, because much like them, there's few complaints, but what's here is all the more glaring for it. The bulk of your army is fairly slow compared to equivalent units in some other factions. Chaos Warriors only have 4 inches of movement speed, and your Chaos Knights, while terrifying, are certainly no Illyrian Reavers. Charging up the battlefield is going to result in you taking some hits. There are, of course, faster units to mitigate this, as mentioned earlier, such as the Chaos Warhounds, but the flip side is that your fast units will fall apart just as fast as they rush up the battlefield. Proper positioning is needed for your chunky boys, and they can eat hits no problem, but if you suffer sustained firepower, you might need to accept a few losses before the melee begins. You might have also noticed that not once did I mention a ballistic skill in your range's roster, and said that they're the best at almost everything in the game. That's because your book is lying to you, and this army's ballistic skill doesn't exist. Oh sure, they printed one for the unit stats, but it doesn't matter, because only 2 units in your army have a proper ranged attack. One is the Marauder Horseman if you give them javelins. This ranged attack is mid at best. The other is the Hell Cannon, the artillery piece that's technically a behemoth. It hits damn hard, I won't lie to you, but it also has some of the most devastating misfire rules in the game, potentially killing everything near it if you roll really poorly and it blows up, or just eating one of its handlers, or alternatively, charging 3d6 inches directly into your enemy front line. That's what happens when you use a demon as a battery, kids. Otherwise though, you get no ranged attacks aside from spells and the occasional dragon breath weapon. So when I said earlier you might be eating some shots on the way to the front line, what I meant is that yes, you will be eating shots. Your opponent also knows what you're going to be doing as a concept, as with all primarily melee armies. You can absolutely mix things up like I said, going all in on heavy knights or bringing some more hounds for quick flanking maneuvers, but at the end of the day you will be charging into melee. Don't fool yourself into thinking that your Marauder Horseman javelins will carry the day on their own, and as for the Hell Cannon, it is scary, but also nearly 215 points unless there's been a rules change I missed. It ain't cheap, so while I don't have any inherent recommendations against it, do keep in mind that if you really want that ranged attack, you're paying for it. If you desperately want more ranged options, you can find ways to include Ungors with bows in your army, but if you're fiending that hard for ranged attacks, maybe just switch over to another army. Speaking of expensive things like the Hell Cannon though, why do you think I said this army is cheap to collect? Everything you have is pricey points-wise, because unless the Ogre Kingdoms make a surprise reappearance in Escape Legends, you are the elite army of the old world. This has the usual caveat of if your big point sync unit or model dies early, then you're probably screwed, but it goes deeper with the WOC especially. I didn't tell a lie when I said that this army has some of the most varied styles of play, nor did I lie when I said that they have the best models in the game for almost every category. You will almost certainly not get to experience being the best at everything all at once, because to do that, then you'd need a few hundred more points than you likely have, unless you and a buddy decide a nice 4,000 point game is in order. Loading up on Chosen and Warriors means you might not have money for Dragon Ogres, which are just under 60 points a model before upgrades. Giving your Cast Lord all the weapons and gifts and a dragon means you're fast running out of points for anything else, for all that whatever you throw them at is going to explode on contact. Too much chaff likely won't be an issue, because Marauders and Warhounds alike are only 6 points a model, but relying on that too much means less heavy hitters, and you'll never have more expendable units than someone playing Goblins or Skeleton Warriors. Everything you have of proper substance has a cost. Basic Cast Warriors are 13 points a model before upgrades. Chosen are 17, and Forsaken are for infantry a pretty sky-high cost of 19 points a model, for a unit that admittedly can do crazy work. Chosen realistically are 19 points a model too, because if you don't take the plate armor for a 4-up armor save and only 2 points a model, I will physically assault you for making that decision. You have all the choice in the world here, but you can only make so many of them before you break the bank. They also only have 2 special characters, which is sad for all sorts of reasons. That's a small number to begin with, but it's especially upsetting because a ton of their characters that were around in Old Fantasy are still alive at this point. Sigvald is hundreds of years old, and Kolek Suneater the Dragon Ogre would also absolutely be around now. There's plenty of options to choose from even if you don't want any crossover with Age of Sigmar characters, and yet we get none of them. Friedel the Chainmaker is awesome, and her stat line is terrifying, but she's also not too worth taking if you aren't running the Army of Infamy designed to work with Marauders. You can kit out an Exalted Champion, the step down from Cast Lord, to be roughly as killy as she is for a cheaper point cost. And then there's Galrock the Great Drake. Aside from being a dated if still admittedly creative model, he's highly dangerous in melee, a level 4 wizard with a dark magic spell school, and aside from his breath weapons desperately trying to give this army a ranged attack, he can once a game use a different breath attack. It forces enemy units to take a toughness test, which if they fail, they flat out die, which is always funny. He's also 465 points, and at the start of every turn you need to take a leadership test or he goes down to a level 1 wizard, has random movement, and if in melee combat, D3 of his attacks are directed at himself. The lore reasons of this are that he's a two-headed dragon with the original noble spirit of an ally of the High Elves still fighting to resist his corrupted self. The gameplay reason is eat shit. Thanks for spending 465 points on a model that's actively throwing your game. Yeah, his leadership is 9, so you probably won't fail, but probably won't and definitely won't are a world apart. And the final tabletop problem. The one I mentioned earlier is something I hope won't actually be an issue for much longer than when I'm writing this. Part of the reason the Warriors of Chaos were so easy to collect is that their battalion box was phenomenal. With the chariots, knights, and all those Chaos Warriors, you could collect 1,500 points with minimal issue if you just say your lord is on one of the chariots. I think the first time I made an army list here, I got it to around 1,100 out of that box alone, and I wasn't trying to squeeze every point out of it that I could. The Marauder battalion box was also great, giving you all the chaff you could want. Buy both of those, and you're golden. But apparently that was a limited time deal. The Marauder box is gone, as is the basic Warriors of Chaos battalion box, at least from the web store. Now this in itself sucks, but at least it's something you aren't alone in. I'm fairly sure only the Dwarfs and Wood Elves still have their battalion box available for purchase. But you know what seems to have gone with them at some point? Chaos Warriors. I'm not making this up. How could I? If I as a joke told you that in the Warriors of Chaos section on the web store you can't buy Chaos Warriors, you'd call me a dirty liar. And I'd agree with you because that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but it's true. As of time of writing and recording, you can't buy Chaos Warriors to play in your Warriors of Chaos army. Is Tzeentch doing this? What the hell's wrong with the world right now? I can only hope that means an update to the sculpts is on the way, but I mean like it's the Warriors of Chaos. What do you mean I cannot buy Warriors of Chaos for the Warriors of Chaos? I am having a stroke. I'm sure they'll just be updating the kits, but if only because I find it so funny, I won't be removing this segment even if by the time the video goes live it's no longer the case. Because for at least some amount of time, if you wanted to play the Warriors of Chaos, you could not purchase from Games Workshop any Warriors of Chaos. So on what is legitimately the most baffling note I've ever ended a video on, that was the Warriors of Chaos in the old world. The evil marauding monsters of Warhammer Fantasy, crushing all who oppose them beneath their demonic footsteps. Just make sure you don't get shot off the board before you can close close the gap. Or, that you can buy the goddamn army to begin with, apparently. I think right now, more than any other time, is when I wish I had insider knowledge at Games Workshop, because what the hell. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Chaos Warriors to my Warriors of Chaos, the heart and soul of the channel, even if apparently you might have been a fever dream all along. Seriously, I know I'm stupid, but what am I missing? Buying Warriors of Chaos and the Chaos Warrior army shouldn't be difficult. But either way, if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Hello viewers, I've recently been informed by a friend of mine that they now hesitate to continue watching the end of my videos because there's always some horrendous nonsense there. And you know what? Fair. I do put the most horrible things at the end. I gotta filter out everyone who still thinks I'm respectable and clicked off at the member shoutout, you know? Really see who my true fans are. But I won't do that here this time, I promise. Instead I will ask you this. Why do you barge into a man's house and criticize the way he arranges his furniture? You don't live here. This isn't your house. I can't talk about elf feet in my normal day-to-day life. I'm not doing that around Grammy Ma, and I would like to not be single at some point in my life. This is the only place I have for that. And you know what? It's my fucking house. I'll plaster the walls in General Grievous Yowie and Vegeta wallpaper if I want, goddammit. This is my channel, and I can try and sync it however I want. Kiss my ass, Aurelia. But also thank you for the dice. They're very nice.